If we're talking about the immunity decision in particular, that decision really enabled Trump's second administration and also some of the abuses that are happening. What the Supreme Court said and the signals that it sent are part of what enabled the administration to use its law enforcement power in such abusive ways. He is threatening the denaturalization of United States citizens. He is threatening to send American citizens to the foreign mega prison in El Salvador. He is opening and supporting the idea that there will be camps where migrants are housed, surrounded by alligators. They are instigating more ICE raids. The stunning and so obvious extent to which they are gerrymandering the law to reflect the Republican Party's priorities.
Welcome to episode 255 of the Refuse-Fascism podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse-Fascism. This is Sam Goldman, one of the volunteers and host of the show. Refuse-Fascism works to unite all who can be united to join in mass nonviolent protest and resistance in the streets and throughout society, growing to include millions and refusing to stop until we create such a profound political crisis that Trump cannot impose his fascist program or maintain his hold on power. Big thanks to our patrons, everyone who rates, reviews, shares the show, and reps our merch. Every bit helps connect more people with Refuse-Fascism. Special shout out to those who took to the streets this July 4th to declare their independence from Trump's fascist America in the name of humanity. Those who spent the week in D.C. in nonviolent action and marched with me to the White House demanding Trump must go now as he signed his big, hideous fascist bill, from slashing Medicaid and SNAP to embedding Christian nationalist theocracy in defunding Planned Parenthood to supercharging funding for the mass detention and deportation machine unleashed on our immigrant siblings. It represents a sweeping assault on fundamental rights. This bill really is the legislative embodiment of Trump's fascist program. If you were in the streets, be sure to tag us in your photos and videos on the socials at Refuse-Fascism. I'm keeping my remarks limited because my voice is hoarse, as you can probably hear from being in the streets all week in DC, and because we have such wonderful things to share with you. But I do want to say to those who I met this week, people who came from across the country, you are so, so precious. And it was so wonderful meeting people who share the commitment to end this fascist nightmare. So today we're sharing an interview with Leah Littman, author of Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes, along with the speech Sunsara Taylor delivered on July 4th in Washington, D.C. June ended with the Supreme Court majority once more essentially giving the green light to Trump's shredding of the U.S. Constitution. This final legal authority now functions as a pillar of the fascist machinery. Today, I am so glad to welcome back on Leah Littman. Leah is a professor of law at the University of Michigan and a co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. She is also the author of the recent New York Times bestseller, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. We're going to break down this Supreme Court term with a real special focus, as promised, on the Supreme Court's ruling in the birthright citizenship case, what it means, and why we should all be not only paying attention, but be deeply concerned over this trajectory. So welcome, Leah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
So before we dig into the specifics, we are now a year out from the Supreme Court's historic and deeply dangerous immunity ruling. And as someone who has tracked this court closely and the transformation of this court, what do you think people most need to understand right now about the direction the court's taking and what the big takeaway is that you want everyone to be paying attention to right now?
So I think if we're talking about the immunity decision in particular, I guess I would want people to keep in mind the extent to which that decision really enabled Trump's second administration and also some of the abuses that are happening in that second administration. The immunity decision and the court's pacing of it is what guaranteed Donald Trump was not going to face trial on the election interference charges before the 2024 presidential election. There's no question that that helped his campaign. And then I also think the substance of what the Supreme Court said and the signals that it sent are part of what enabled the administration to use its law enforcement power in such abusive ways. If you think about, for example, the administration threatening criminal charges against political opposition or actually instituting criminal charges against political opposition, I think that is one of the things that the immunity decision might have emboldened the administration to do. Because in that decision, one of the more horrifying things the court said is when it comes to law enforcement, investigation, and prosecution, the president's powers are complete and exclusive and cannot even be touched by Congress. That is even outside of criminal prosecution. And they horrifyingly added, it doesn't matter if the president is exercising those powers to begin sham investigation or to conduct enforcement for improper personal motives. And so I think those assurances to the president probably made it easier for them to feel like nobody's going to stop us when they began those efforts to use law enforcement powers in that way.
Thanks for that, Leah. I was thinking about the end of June. We're programmed to just expect incoming horror. And every year we know, oh, it's going to be worse this time. I guess this latest flurry of rulings are equally devastating in many ways. But before we dive into Trump v. Casa, I wanted to give some attention to the many other awful major decisions that came down this term. And I wanted to ask you what stood out to you this term, what you feel is being revealed about where this court is headed.
Can I say more than one thing?
You can absolutely say all the things. One of the things that I'm sure you have a take on is the enshrined vibe of we are a aggrieved people, we being white men, that was accelerated this term.
Yes, that vibe is definitely very present in the Supreme Court's decisions. This idea that religious and social conservatives and the Republican Party are the real aggrieved parties. Honestly, I think you can see that in some ways as influencing the Supreme Court's disposition of the birthright citizenship case and their choice to limit lower federal courts' authority 5 months into the Trump administration in the context of one of the administration's more lawless and illegal policies. They decided we're going to tackle that now rather than during the Biden administration, probably because they view the extent of lower court rulings against the Trump administration as reflecting some sort of hostility to Donald Trump and his administration. You add to that decisions like Mahmoud versus Taylor, which said that religious parents have a constitutional right to receive notice of whether their child is about to be exposed to instruction that includes reading storybooks with LGBT characters, and they have a constitutional right to opt their children out of that instruction. That too rests on the idea that those who are opposed to marriage equality, those who are hostile to the existence of trans people, that they are the true victims who are being targeted by a society that doesn't share their views. So I think that through line, which I write about in the book, it's the first part of the book subtitle, is very much on display this term. The second theme that I would say is the court's willingness to enable the Trump administration. This has largely happened on what we call the shadow docket, which is the set of orders and decisions the Supreme Court makes without full briefing or oral argument. On the shadow docket, they have given the administration their requested relief, removing the administration's continuing obligation to comply with two lower court orders that the administration clearly violated, in my view. So I think the extent to which this court has really legitimized and given cover to the administration's war on the lower federal courts is one of the more notable stories of the last term. Third and finally, I would just say the stunning and so obvious extent to which they are gerrymandering the law to reflect the Republican Party's priorities, to favor litigants associated with Republican causes and to disadvantage litigants who aren't associated with the Republican Party. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a dissent in one of the lesser notice cases of this past term, Diamond Alternative Energy, which is about whether a group of fuel producers can challenge an EPA California regulation. She said in that case, the court is fueling the perception that they cater to moneyed corporate interests and that they give those plaintiffs an easier time. At the same time, she wrote in her dissent from the birthright citizenship order that the groups that will be hit hardest are the poor, the uneducated, and those without power. So I think that the court's willingness to attack public institutions that serve as sites of potential opposition to the Republican Party and the rise of fascism, be it public health, public insurance, public education, coupled with their willingness to give special rights to litigants and groups and causes that are associated with the Republican Party is also a really notable trend of the last term.
Really appreciate that breakdown. I wanted to turn now to talk more about Trump v. CASA. The decision neuters the ability of the federal judiciary to block executive actions, but it also involves an attack on birthright citizenship. And I'm hoping you could break down the case a little bit more for us. What was it really about? And what does this ruling mean, not just legally, but for people's lives?
This is going to be technical and it might take a little bit, so feel free to interrupt or ask any follow-up as I begin down this road. But these cases are challenges to Donald Trump's executive order that purports to deny certain American-born babies their constitutional right to birthright citizenship if they are born to certain kinds or groups of non-citizens, those who might be legally but temporarily present, or those who are here without legal authorization. And those policies, that effort to deny people birthright citizenship, is obviously unconstitutional under Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof shall be citizens of the United States. It also violates a congressional law that reiterates that guarantee and reinforces it through legislation. So lower courts uniformly ruled that this policy is indeed illegal, and many of them issued what are called nationwide injunctions. All that means is the court blocked the policy from going into effect anywhere as applied to anyone. So what the court said is it's not just that you, government, can't apply this policy to the individual plaintiff or organization that sued. It's that you can't apply this policy to anyone. And what the Supreme Court said is, on that remedial question, that is, what can courts do once they conclude a policy is illegal, lower federal courts generally do not have the authority to block the federal government from implementing a policy as to people who aren't parties to a decision. So other than the individuals who sued in the case. Now, they noted 3 possible exceptions to that rule, one for class actions, one for cases that are filed by states rather than individual entities, and one for litigation that happens under the Administrative Procedure Act, which is not how this litigation is shaping up. So, the extent to which plaintiffs challenging the birthright citizenship executive order are able to get nationwide relief will depend in part on the scope of those exceptions, which I'm happy to talk more about. But I think the ways in which this remedial decision interacts with birthright citizenship are many. One is the court's decision to take up this issue in the context of this litigation over this policy, which again is so extreme, so obviously brazenly illegal, has unfortunately provided, I think, some legitimacy and kept this policy and questions about birthright citizenship in the discourse rather than had they opted to decide the merits, right, and say simultaneously, okay, lower courts, you might not have the authority to issue nationwide injunctions. On the other hand, you were totally right to invalidate this policy that would have closed the debate and put to rest the administration's threats to birthright citizenship and people who rely on it. I also think it is horribly corrosive to the legal system to have enabled the executive branch to begin down the road of developing its processes, its procedures, its guidelines for how to implement this wildly unlawful policy. Under the terms of the executive order, the federal government has 30 days before the policy goes into effect, during which time it will provide guidance about how exactly they will purport to deny individuals citizenship based on the legal status of their parents. We have no idea what that regime is going to look like. We don't know whether ICE is going to be walking around hospitals. We don't know whether the expectation is that parents who show up to hospitals have to bring their own birth certificates. We have no idea how this regime is going to work. And the idea that the administration gets to begin considering that is just horrifying. You add to that the fact that I think the court's decision to take up this issue in the context of an executive branch challenge to a Reconstruction amendment signals the court's hostility to the project of Reconstruction and the potential for multiracial democracy that it represents. I think all of those are ways in which the court's ruling, which isn't really a ruling, isn't at all a ruling on the merits of the executive order, nonetheless bleeds over some into the birthright citizenship issue.
I really appreciate that breakdown, in particular, the connection with what this means for real people's lives. I just wanted to connect how significant I think that this neo-Confederacy aspect should be something that people pay attention to. Like the idea that people could be stateless in one by virtue of like where they are physically located just rings so much of the pre-Civil War. Ellie Mistal, for people listening, they did a really, really good analysis of this that we mentioned on the last show. But I think this patchwork of rights, we saw the post-Roe aspect of it all, the Dobbs aspect of it all. And I just think that they're just expanding more and more and more from there. One thing that I think has been very confusing is this 30 days aspect of it. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. For those listening, Trump, and please correct me, Leah, has 30 days before the executive order that started this case can go into effect. While people are saying that the details of this case were not in fact cited, what is this 30 days for, and what will happen in 30 days to citizens who would be affected by that order?
So the 30-day period is because the executive order itself said this policy will go into effect 30 days after its announcement, during which time the federal government will begin laying out processes and guidelines for how it will implement the policy. So it's because the terms of the policy itself contemplate this 30-day ramp-up period. And in the Supreme Court argument, the government took the position that that 30-day period never began because the federal courts had enjoined or blocked the policy before it ever got off the ground. That is, before the administration began coming up with its plans for how to implement the policy. So what happens in 30 days after the Supreme Court's decision? This would be July 27th. I think the answer is we don't yet know. And we don't know for two reasons. One is it is possible that before that time, some federal court somewhere will rely on one of the exceptions to the Supreme Court's rule against nationwide injunctions and block the policy again on a nationwide basis. So we don't know whether that would happen. We don't know whether those decisions might be in place in some jurisdictions, but not others. So that is one lingering issue about why we just don't know what's going to happen in 30 days. And then the second reason why we don't exactly know what's going to happen in 30 days is we don't know what the administration is going to say is their plan for implementing the executive order. So we don't know what this post-birthright citizenship world or regime might look like in the event it is allowed to go into effect, at least in some places.
What I wanted to connect back to was the impact of federal injunctions. Shortly within hours, I forget the exact time difference, of the Supreme Court decision that we've been discussing, he did a press conference that was basically like his victory lap, him and Pam Bondi and others being like, we got it all. Our pals got our backs. You thought we were able to do a lot. Not only did they say yes to our birthright citizenship, they said yes to all that we ever wanted. I wanted your take on what are the immediate impacts of limiting, restricting, however you would word it, the federal injunctions that have prevented Trump from enacting some of his policies. What goes into effect quickly, and then what are the more long-term, broader implications of these moves that have stopped his lawlessness? I mean, I just can't get over still his comment like, they blocked me more than anybody else. And it's like, that's because you've done more unconstitutional shit than anyone else. Even people that he's appointed have blocked him. I guess first, immediate impacts and then longer term.
Yeah, so immediate impacts. The Trump administration is going to be filing all sorts of requests for reconsideration and stay applications in the lower courts that have issued these decisions blocking various Trump administration policies on a nationwide basis and saying these rulings are now invalid. Based on the Supreme Court's decision, you need to revisit them. We don't yet know exactly which decisions might be affected because we don't know in what cases the plaintiffs might try to refile them as class action litigation. We don't know in what set of cases the courts might say, well, this case that was filed by a state, I actually need to award nationwide relief in order to fix all of the harms to the state. That is the legal standard the Supreme Court said was the relevant issue that courts should focus on as they are deciding whether states can get nationwide relief. So in the short term, we don't know exactly what the scope of those exceptions will look like. And we don't know in part because the Supreme Court didn't tell us. They did not opine on the question of whether states in this case were entitled to a nationwide injunction. And we don't know the extent to which they would agree that class action litigation in the birthright citizenship case is an appropriate vehicle. This Supreme Court has been fairly hostile to the existence of class action litigation. So we don't know in what set of cases that will actually prove to be a substitute for nationwide injunctions. I think over the long term, this is absolutely going to replicate the situation you were describing, post-Dobbs, a patchwork of rules where your rights exist in some places, but not others, because some states, but not others, opted to challenge a Trump administration policy, and some courts, but not others, granted class certification and therefore were able to issue broader rulings. And so I think this is absolutely going to undermine the uniform set of national, federal, civil, and constitutional rights that people in this country enjoy. I also think, frankly, it is going to embolden the Trump administration's war against the lower federal courts, because in the context of this policy that, again, is one of the more wildly illegal ones, the Supreme Court said the problem here is what the lower courts did, not what the executive branch did. And in that way is kind of feeding the administration's war on the prospect of judicial oversight in the lower federal courts.
The case reveals two things pretty clearly. One, the courts will not and will not be allowed to save us. And two, as you just indicated, they're just getting started. You spoke to this some just now, but what do you think Trump is going to do moving forward with next, knowing that he won't be stopped by judges or by the threat of criminal prosecution?
I certainly don't want to speculate about what exactly he is going to do next. He has already done so much. He is threatening the denaturalization of United States citizens. He is threatening to send American citizens to the foreign mega prison in El Salvador, CCOT. He is opening and supporting the idea that there will be camps where migrants are housed, surrounded by alligators in over 100-degree temperatures. They are instigating more ICE raids. So certainly that's a lot right there. I don't know exactly where it will go next.
As we close out the conversation, we have to ask where you are finding hope and where we should be putting our energy. In this dark time, where are you looking to? Because it's clear that the higher up you go within the courts, the more stacked by people who are just enabling, if not facilitating, atrocity. So where do you look at for?
Yeah, so I would say two places. One is what is happening in state and local races, in particular, the election in April in Wisconsin about the Wisconsin Supreme Court, where the people of Wisconsin rejected an effort by Elon Musk to pump dump tens of millions of dollars into the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and flip the court from progressive to conservative. That court just issued a decision in which they said that Wisconsin's near total abortion ban from the 1800s is not in effect. There was a remarkable concurrence by Chief Justice Jill Karofsky, one of the progressive justices, who again is now the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in which she recounted the stories of women who had lost their lives because of abortion restrictions. So the fact that in these state and local elections, people are showing up and indicating this administration does not have a mandate for its behavior, and they are trying to push back. That is part of what gives me hope. And second, and relatedly, I'd say the No Kings protests and related signs of, again, pushback to this administration, coupled with the plummeting approval ratings of the administration and the extent to which that makes it easier for Democratic and progressive politicians to push back against the administration. So those are the two places that I found some hope.
I want to thank you, Leah, for taking the time to share your expertise, your clarity, your insights, and helping people understand what's at stake. We are going to put a link to Lawless in the show notes, along with Strict Scrutiny. If there's anywhere else that you want to direct people to, or any other recent writing that you want to share with people that you think would be of interest, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to do so.
Sure. In addition to my writing on the Supreme Court, which again, you can definitely get a real download on by getting Lawless, where you can get anywhere you get your books. I've also been working some on the Trump administration's defiance of lower court orders and their treatment of lower court orders. So I have a piece in The Atlantic called How to Hide a Constitutional Crisis that is based on a much longer law review article that I have co-authored that's 70-some pages and kind of comprehensively looks at the Trump administration's responses to adverse judicial rulings.
Awesome. So we'll definitely link that in the show notes. And I really found helpful the piece you did for Democracy Docket.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did a kind of term recap for Democracy Docket that tries to synthesize, this theme that we were talking about earlier from the last term about the Republican justices basically gerrymandering the law, fashioning these made up exceptions in order to give Republicans more political power and further the Republican Party's political project.
Thanks so much, Leah.
Thank you.
The people, the tens of millions who hate Trump and MAGA, who are disgusted by everything that they represent, including the millions who came into the streets on No King's Day, show the true potential and power we do have. But those protests need to take a leap. And let's be real, they got to take a leap now. Time is running out to transform into a nonviolent uprising from below that disrupts business as usual and grows day after day. And while some Democratic politicians may rightly voice their opposition to fascism, the party as an institution will not and cannot lead the kind of fight that's necessary to stop it. Listeners, that responsibility falls to us, the people. We must act together, relentlessly, urgently, until this regime is removed from power. In that spirit, Refuse-Fascism.org organized 4 days of action in D.C., culminating in a march on the White House on July 4th. On July 4th, we declared our independence from Trump's fascist America in the name of humanity in nonviolent protests in Washington, D.C., and in other places nationwide, including in Los Angeles, where they also demanded an end to the military occupation of the city. While Trump signed his big fascist bill, we held a die-in to demonstrate that this is a murderous bill. People will die without health care. Immigrants will die in detention and in foreign lands. We then rose up and demanded Trump must go now as B-2 bombers flew overhead, celebrating this hideous fascist budget bill, celebrating throwing millions off of health care, celebrating massively escalating Gestapo ICE raids and mass detentions. Prior to our march on the White House, Sunsara Taylor, a co-initiator of Refuse-Fascism, delivered this speech.
Sisters and brothers, I am so happy to be with you today as we are about to march to the White House and declare our independence in the name of humanity from Trump's fascist America, where we will gather at the very hour that Donald Trump is scheduled to sign that hideous, big, fat, ugly fascist bill. And we will raise the biggest chant heard round the world. Trump must go now! Trump must go now! I want to talk today about why we are Yesterday, the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump the green light, to deport 8 men who have been held in shackles for over a month in Djibouti to South Sudan. A country they have no ties to, a country engulfed in civil war and famine, a country where they are almost certain to face torture. And I want to tell you exactly what a spokesperson for Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security said about this ruling. She said, and I quote, "These sickos will be in South Sudan by Independence Day." Think about that. Think about that language. These sickos. Fling them across the globe. Let them face torture. No due process. Who cares about their lives or their families, their hopes? These sickos. Not human beings. The people who talk this way are the ones who are running this country right now. These are the people making the laws in this country. These are the people commanding ICE. These are the people greenlit by the Supreme Court. These are the people controlling your future. And this is how they celebrate the 4th of July. So I want to say, no, Trump must go now. We are told to celebrate on the 4th of July the founding of a country rooted in freedom and liberty, throwing off the shackles of tyranny. And I'm glad that there are people here today who've spoken to this vision, who believe in it deeply, and for whom it motivates them to stand up. But I also share the view voiced by others of the understanding that this country, in fact, was founded on exploitation. Black people were considered property. Women had no rights. Native peoples were slaughtered. And in fact, in the founders' original Declaration of Independence, one of their complaints against the King of England is that he allegedly fomented rebellions among the slaves and the native peoples. But even if you believe in America as an idea founded in freedom, pursuing an ever more perfecting union, you have to say this year things are different. Now, I thought about it. It could be a perfect metaphor to say the 4th of July should be canceled this year. But in fact, it's not a metaphor. How many of you know that all across Southern California, 4th of July celebrations are in fact canceled? You guys know this? The city-sponsored block party in downtown Los Angeles, canceled. The East LA Rockin' 4th of July concert, canceled. Outdoor movies and concerts in Rowland Heights, canceled. Freedom Walk in Whittier, celebrations in Cudahy and Huntington Park, canceled, canceled, canceled. In Bell Gardens, it's not just events today that are canceled, but every single city event between now and July 10th. And you want to know why? Because these are immigrant communities. And because of the terror, because of the kidnappings, because of the masked men, because of the unmarked vans, because of the wailing children, because of the cramped, overcrowded detention centers, because of the lack of food, the denial of lawyers, the medical deprivation, the lack of water, the 56 men in a cramped cell sharing one open pit toilet with no privacy. This is why the 4th of July has literally been canceled. People are terrified to leave their homes. The streets of bustling immigrant communities are silent. And it's not just in Los Angeles. It's happening in the shadows all across this country. We know about it in LA because people have stood up against it and forced us to see. But it is happening everywhere. This morning, I transcribed the words of a young girl from Mississippi. She looked to me like maybe 10 years old, and she was wiping away tears as furiously as she could with both her hands as she spoke. She said, "I want my dad." She said, "The Hispanic people are not doing nothing bad. Please open the doors to the jail. I'm not going to have nothing. It's my first day of school for me. My dad bought me everything for me to live over here, the rent. And now I don't know what I'm going to eat. And I am so lonely right now. I need my dad to help me. He's not a criminal. Governments, please put your heart. Let my parents be free with everyone else. Please don't leave the child with this crying." This is why July 4th is literally canceled. This is why the streets of immigrant neighborhoods across this country have fallen silent. And I want to ask you, how different is this really than the early days of Hitler? Jewish families hid indoors. They pulled their children from school. They stayed in from synagogue. They shuttered their businesses. Many of them, long before they were fully deported and exterminated, saw their neighborhoods fall silent. And today, just like then, this dehumanization and violent disappearing of one section of society is a battering ram for a whole larger fascist program. Fascism, that's what you gotta call it. Not authoritarianism, not autocracy, fascism. It has meaning, and it's not a curse word. Fascism is a qualitative change in the form of government. It means no rights, no dissent, no recourse in the courts, just open terroristic dictatorship, brute force. And in this country, with its history and its roots, fascism is enforcing a program of open, aggressive reassertion of white supremacy, of vitriolic, violent hatred of women and LGBT people, of xenophobic, genocidal hatred of foreigners and America First chauvinism. Fascism is the Supreme Court giving Trump a blank check to shred the Constitution, as long as people don't sue fast enough or not in the right jurisdiction, which they said a week ago. Fascism is the Supreme Court saying Trump can break the law because he's president, which they said a year ago. Fascism is erasing trans people and forcing women to have children against their will. Fascism is the president threatening governors, vanishing protesters, silencing students, disappearing rights. Fascism is the military occupying the streets of this country. Political assassinations, illegal acts of unprovoked aggressive war. And we've seen all this and more just in the first 5 months. The lesson of history is that fascism must be defeated before it becomes too late, before it is fully consolidated, before the space for people to stand up is shut down completely, before everybody of conscience has been rounded up or intimidated into silence. That time is now.
Let's go now!
Today, Donald Trump is dangerously close to consolidating fascism. This is why we say Trump must go now. Now! I'm one of the co-initiators of Refuse-Fascism.org. We founded this back in 2016. Y'all can cheer for that. Refuse-Fascism.org's mission is to unite everybody who can possibly be united from very different political perspectives and backgrounds and walks of life to stand up together, to pour into the streets non-violently, but with determination and not stopping, growing till we become millions and create the level of profound political crisis across this country, such that Donald Trump cannot govern this country, cannot impose his fascist program, and cannot even hang on to the reins of power. This is what humanity needs from us. And so I call on every single one of you here today to join Refuse-Fascism.org. If you're part of a movement already, partner with us. Take up this mission. Bring your voice, your unique perspective, your talents, your funds and resources, your networks, your creativity, your hopes for the future, and your refusal to bow down to fascism into this movement. We need you. Humanity needs you. And I want to call on you to come back out with us, to join with the protests happening across the country. July 17th, called Good Trouble Lives On. And to bring in this message that Trump must go now. Bring in this message and the mission of Refuse Fascism. And I want to call on you to protest as well with us on July 28th, the day that birthright citizenship, that part of the Constitution, is set to be shredded in over half the states in this country, where children, thousands of children will be born stateless. We will be protesting. And I call on you to join with us every day, everywhere that Trump is carrying out his crimes, and everywhere that people are in fear and anger and agonizing for a way to act. Become an organizer with us. Help us reach them, organize them to take up this mission. We do not have much time. You are needed. Now, I personally come to this movement as a very proud follower of the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian. He is the architect of the new communism, a whole new framework for human emancipation. And I say this openly because there are people on the internet and other places who will tell you to be scared of this. And they'll tell you this is some kind of secret hidden agenda of Refuse-Fascism. No, it is not. It is an agenda that those of us in Refuse-Fascism who want revolution are very open about. I am very open about it. And I'm happy to stand with people who don't share this larger agenda because we do share the agenda of defeating fascism. I have this view because I have become convinced that this country, as it was founded in genocide and slavery, and as it is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, has always been about oppression and exploitation, and this can't be reformed away, and we need a revolution. I've become convinced that we can live a whole better way, and I've read the Constitution for the new socialist republic in North America that Bob Avakian wrote for a whole new way to live, a fundamentally different system where the rights of the people are guaranteed, including the most fundamental right of all, the right of the people to have the determining role in the direction of society, to join in debate and discussing the way forward, to dig up all oppression, all exploitation, all forms of enforced ignorance, not just here, but all over the world. I think this is possible, and I invite you to learn about it. Now, I want to be clear, you don't have to agree with me to be in the Refuse-Fascism movement. You don't even have to look into what I'm talking about. I hope you do. I encourage you to. But if you're going to form an opinion about it, I insist that you have the integrity to do so based on engaging what Bob Avakian actually has put forward, what we actually stand for, and not based on snark and rumor and red baiting and anti-communist slander and divide and conquer tactics, which are all too real, all too widespread, and all too useful to those who want to crush this movement. As we stand together, we should debate the roots of this fascism. We should talk about and get into what it will take to defeat it and what kind of world is needed and possible. We should share our differences and where we unite, but we should not let those differences divide us. There is too much at stake. And I will tell you, it is from this perspective that I am 100% sincere. And we RevComs are sincere about uniting all who can be united to stand up against this Trump MAGA fascism and bring it to a halt and drive it from power through mass nonviolent protests. And we need all of each other. We need each other in this fight. So I want to speak about how this can be made real. We have seen the potential to defeat Trump MAGA fascism in the millions of people who have stood up across this country. An estimated 5 million people came out in the streets in thousands of towns and cities just 2 weeks ago for the No King's Day protests. Here in D.C., Refuse-Fascism, we led almost 2,000 people from this circle down to the White House that day in defiance of Trump's threats and against his military parade. And in Los Angeles, we have seen people stand up with courage and determination, overwhelmingly nonviolently, up against the ICE terror and raids, up against the police violence and terror, up against the deployment of the National Guard and the U.S. Marines. And this shows our power, and it has given strength to people across this country. It shows our potential. But here's the thing. Overwhelmingly, the tens of millions of decent people in this country who hate what Trump is doing, some of them may use the word fascism more often today than they used to, but they are still acting like it's not real. They are still waiting. They are still hoping. They are still telling themselves delusional things like, oh, we'll remember who voted for this bill. We'll vote them out in 2026. Oh, we'll get Trump out in 2028. I'm sorry. Waiting for the next elections to deal with Trump MAGA fascism is like seeing a man collapse in the street of a heart attack. He's clutching at his chest. He's gasping for air. He's lying on the ground, and instead of calling an ambulance, you say, oh, there's nothing to worry about. He has a routine checkup scheduled in a year and a half. No, there's an emergency now. He needs CPR now. And right now, sisters and brothers, beautiful people, our rights, the lives of millions of immigrants, the future of humanity is in cardiac arrest. We cannot wait a year and a half. We have to act now. We need emergency intervention. And what does that look like? It looks like all these millions of people coming back in the streets, not one time symbolically and going home, waiting another month and coming again, but again and again in such numbers that we overwhelm Donald Trump and his fascist program. Think about what you've seen in Los Angeles. Now imagine if instead of dozens or hundreds of people every time ICE shows up, if it was thousands or tens of thousands. Yeah. Imagine if every institution that is carrying out Trump's fascism was surrounded by truly massive numbers of people, non-violently. But this would overwhelm things. They'd be impeded from carrying out their terror. And imagine how it would deepen the divides within those institutions and strengthen those who are silent now but who hate what Trump is doing to stand up and resist themselves. And imagine how it would give backbone to even some weak-kneed politicians to start to stand up. And imagine how that would give the people more strength. And imagine how the acts of repression and violence from the regime, if people stood up and were not provoked by them, but also didn't back down, could lead more people to be outraged and inspired to join them. Imagine how this could grow, and imagine if through it all, the demand were being raised that Trump must go now.
Trump must go now.
Because millions were coming to understand that unless and until this regime is removed from power, it will overwhelm even the most powerful opposition. It will move on many fronts, more than we can possibly keep up with. But if we get out in the streets and demand that single unifying demand, he must go now, we can overwhelm the source. And we can change the whole direction of this country and drive him from power. So yes, this will take courage. And yes, this will take sacrifice. But it is worth it. I want to ask you to think once again about those 8 men being shipped today in shackles to South Sudan. I want you to think about that 10-year-old girl crying for her father. And I want you to multiply that times millions and think about what this world will be like if we let this Trump fascist regime stay in power. And now I want you to think about the joy and the strength and the unity and the power and the hopes for the future to go even further that we could bring into being by standing up together, by rallying our friends and neighbors, by waking others up and staying in these streets and not stopping until this whole society is brought to a halt and Trump is removed. The future is unwritten. Which one we get is up to us. So I want to ask you to join Refuse-Fascism. Take up this mission. Don't do it next year. Don't do it when it's convenient. Do it when it matters most. Do it now. In the name of humanity.
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 We refuse to accept.
We refuse to accept.
We refuse to accept.
We refuse to accept.
A fascist America.
A fascist America.
Trump must go now.
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 Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for more highlights from the diverse voices that participated in our rallies, and watch and share footage that's up on our social media. One minor correction to Sunsara's remarks is that July 27th is the date we will be demanding hands-off birthright citizenship. Trump must go now, as that is the earliest date Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship could be enforced in 28 states.
In the name of humanity, refuse to accept a fascist America. Fascist America. In the name of humanity, refuse to accept a fascist America. Fascist America. In the name of humanity, refuse to accept a fascist America.
That was Waking Stone kicking off our march to the White House at our July 4th protest. Thanks for listening to Refuse-Fascism. Your support is urgently needed to get the message of this show and this movement organizing on a whole different level, influencing millions. Donate today at refusefascism.org. Just hit that donate button or text support to 855-755-1314. You can also join our Patreon community at patreon.com/refusefascism, where your support keeps the show going and fighting against this fascist nightmare. Please share this episode far and wide, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Drop a comment on our socials or YouTube. Every share and every word helps build this movement. Find us on social media at Refuse-Fascism, including Blue Sky, and follow us on TikTok at Refuse-Fascism, where fascism is spelled F-A-S-H-I-Z-M. Big thanks to Richie Marini, Lena Thorne, and Mark Tinkelman for their amazing work producing the show. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.